Welcome to the Seeker's Table. I'm your host, Ian White Marr, and each week I interview a spiritual companion about how contemplative practice can guide us into the sacred mutuality that binds us all together. This particular conversation is part of our 7-episode series on Lent, where we explore how we can use contemplative practices to open ourselves as we observe the journey through Lent with a particular eye towards justice. My guest today is Dr. Catherine Meeks. She's a founding executive director of the Absalom Jones Episcopal Center for Racial Healing, as well as the retired Clara Carter Oculi Distinguished Professor of Sociocultural Studies and Sociology from Wesleyan College. She's authored or edited 7 books, including Living into God's Dream, Dismantling Racism in America, which focuses on racial healing and reconciliation. She's involved with prison work and is committed to the abolition of the death penalty, as well as helping to create spaces where transformation and rebirth can occur. Catherine, it's really great to have you. And the last time we saw each other, we were in your town in Atlanta.
Yes.
And we were at that time really kind of talking about some issues of redemption. I was going to do some work at Stone Mountain and doing a contemplative journey up there, sort of. I was sitting a retreat. And I'm wondering if you can tell us, for you, what it means to be a contemplative, what the practice looks like for you, how you experience God as a contemplative, your relationship.
Yeah. Well, I think that life is always evolving, and so even my understanding of contemplation and the practices that I've been engaging for a long time, all of those things begin to have, they don't stay stagnant. I mean, you change, your life changes, your focus changes, what works for you changes. And so one of the things that I realize is that the practice of journaling and silence and prayer and just sitting and being reflective helps me to have the courage that I need to live in the world, because the work that I do around racial healing is incredibly taxing, and my understanding of this world that I live in is also taxing. And so having a contemplative side of my life, I think, is really a source of salvation. Really, it's a source of being saved in the present moment from just kind of going off into, a whole bunch of places I don't want to be, because there's so much always challenging me to be dispirited, or to be even afraid, to be in despair, and having this other side, this other place to go to, this silence, the quietness, the place where I can actually hear better what God has to say, is really a saving grace.
So
And so important.
What does that look like for you? How does that, do you practice centering prayer, or do you just sort of sit in silence, or how does that sort of show up for you?
I spend a lot of time just being quiet. And of course, with COVID, this has been a whole different experience, because before COVID, I was up and out in the mornings and gone all day and coming home late, and having to kind of fit everything in and around that kind of schedule. And now I've been working at home, and my son and I live together. and my son is a coder who works from home. So we're in a small apartment with two cats, and which has been okay. I mean, we've done phenomenally well, given that we've been here. The 9th of March will be a year.
Right.
And when we started quarantining, I had no idea that a year later we'd still be doing this. I thought by fall we'd be back in the office and back busy and doing everything. So it's changed a lot. Some of the time that I spend being contemplative, I spend painting mandalas. Sometimes I'm playing and working with handmade paper and creating things. So it has. I think people typically think that if you're a contemplative, you're sitting somewhere by yourself, really in a cave, separated from real life. But that's not the case for me at all. It I'm I do spend time being silent. I spend time journaling. I spend time just sitting and being reflective. But I also find that painting mandalas, I don't draw them myself.
Hmm.
I buy books of them and then I paint them. I find that to be a very contemplative practice because and I'll tell you something else. I love ironing. And so that's another practice for me because when I'm ironing, I'm actually doing something, but my mind is totally not involved in what I'm doing because you don't need to think about ironing. You just do it. And it's one of the most comforting things that I can do. And I love to do it and do it often. And people laugh at me because in the modern day, you're not even supposed to have clothes that need to be ironed. I have a lot of clothes that need to be ironed because it's such a good part of my helping me to have well-being. And that's how I think about a contemplative life, that everything you do ought to be helping you to live your life better and so that you can be more available to what God's got in mind for you and for the work God's got in front of you. So it's not something you're doing just because you know how to do it or because it sounds great to call yourself a contemplative, or whatever. No, it's really directly related to surviving this journey as a human being on the planet from birth to death. It is a tool to help with making that journey and making it in ways that really honor the gifts and talents that God's given to us. So I see it in pretty practical terms. I don't think that I would ever be somebody who would go and live just as a monk in a monastic life that way. I mean, that kind of by yourself somewhere and just stay. I mean, it sounds wonderful in terms of romanticizing, but in terms of actual life, this is the life that I have to live. I'm busy. I've got a lot of responsibilities. I've been given a lot of gifts, and therefore I'm held accountable to do a lot of things. And yet, the biggest thing I have to do is take care of myself and be grounded so that I can actually hear what I'm supposed to be doing. And I think that this way of thinking and living helps me to do that better than anything I could imagine. And it's something I've been um, sort of engaged with since I was an 8-year-old child. I mean, I used to get up when I was 8 years old and go sit on the back door steps and watch the sunrise in the mornings without anybody telling me anything. I mean, I don't really even know. I mean, when you're 8 years old, what do you know? But I was sort of like little Samuel being called by God to go do something
Mm.
that I didn't even understand. And but I just got up and did it. And it was good. And when I think about it now, I say I used to get up and go watch the world wake up
Mm.
because the birds, and I mean, it would just barely be sunrise in Arkansas. And I would just sit on the back door steps and wait for the sun to get up, and then I would hear little birds singing, and it was a lovely experience. And I would do that for a little bit, and then I'd go back in my house, and nobody seemed to be particularly interested or concerned about it because we lived in the country and it was safe. And if I wanted to get up and go sit on the back door steps, it wasn't going to be a real big deal. But as I look back through my life, I see how that this place that I am today, as a 74-year-old, actually was started when I was 8 years old. And that's kind of it's had all kinds of twists and turns and ups and downs and ins and outs, but the pathway, the commitment, the understanding, the sense of this is an important thing to do, that's been there since I was 8, that I've been conscious about. Maybe it was even before, and I just don't realize it.
And so when I think about the contemplative tradition, well, we're really seeing a sort of a revival, if you will, of sort of contemplative practices within the Christian tradition. And I don't know if
Mm-hmm.
that's because it's been so influenced by Buddhism in America or other, sort of contemplative traditions. But this it isn't something that's taught to a lot of young or Christians as they're growing up. And so I'm just curious how you were introduced to this idea of contemplative spirituality, and you know how it has informed your Christianity and your relationship with God.
Well, I've learned a lot of language and gone to classes and been in dream groups and all kinds of workshops and things as an adult. But for the most part, what I've just said a minute ago about being this kid that got up to watch the sunrise, that loved to spend time by herself, that that wasn't ever taught to me or told to me as something I should be doing. That was an intuitive kind of response to something, and maybe just an understanding of trying to figure out how to survive, maybe.
Hmm.
And so I think that for me, getting on this path has been more of a response to necessity, to find a way to be a human being without going crazy in a world that was crazy making. And so sort of like you get involved in something and then you learn later how to talk about it,
Hmm.
because you don't because you didn't even I didn't even have the language. I didn't know what contemplation was. Wasn't something I'd ever even actually heard of until I got to be I guess I was in my 30s probably when I first started hearing about silence and practice and all that. So, but up to that time, I was always doing these practices, journaling and being quiet and going sometimes on Sundays, instead of going to sit in the church house, I would go to sit in a park and watch a stream for 3 hours instead of going to church. That's all a part of this whole fabric of how can you live your life, and having this practice that helps me to live my life, that now has I can talk about it under this framework of contemplative and mystical and all those things, but basically it was just a survival, an effort to survive. And maybe that's what we're all doing, is just trying to figure out how we can survive. And
Well, I love actually that you keep tying that together, because I think a lot of people, you know, when life gets busy, one of the first things that goes is the meditation practice, right?
mhm,
Exercise, meditate.
mhm,
Like we find ways to sort of figure out what we're going to sacrifice, or maybe our mind tricks us into sacrificing something.
mhm,
And
mhm,
what I keep hearing you say is that this is essential for survival. This isn't just
mhm,
about
mhm,
reducing anxiety, right? This
mhm,
is this is what keeps you sane. This is what keeps you healthy.
mhm, mhm.
And has that always been so clear for you, or um, when you talk to people about not just your work in the this your center, but also elsewhere, that
Mhm.
that it's a survival. How do they respond to you when they say it's like this is really about survival?
Well, I think it resonates with people because people are looking for ways to survive,
Hmm.
and they don't get many um, invitations to explore what that might look like.
Hmm.
Everybody's supposed to know how to do everything. I mean, that's the way we characterize too much stuff in the church like that. You're supposed to know. You read the Bible, it's supposed to tell you what to do. Well, it doesn't. And so, that's the bottom line. It doesn't. And yet but then you don't want to say you don't know because you're supposed to know. And so you have to act like you know. And so when people hear me talking about, no, you don't know because nobody ever taught you, nobody ever told you, nobody ever invited you into an interrogation of any of this. They just told you you're being a Christian, you're supposed to love and you're supposed to be at peace. And how are you supposed to do all of that in a world that's crazy and chaotic and falling apart? You have to find a pathway, some kind of pathway. And I think the contemplative practices are part of that pathway. And yet we don't how many sermons have you ever heard about being a contemplative and being, or how many formation classes are there in the average church on Sundays about trying to learn how to really live the life that we say we're supposed to be living because we're people of faith. And I don't think there's any sinfulness in being taught how to be on the journey, that we could stand a whole lot more instruction. So that's one of my most, it's not favorite, but one of my most poignant beefs with the Episcopal Church, which is what I am,
Hmm.
an Episcopalian. That we don't, we tell people, we teach all these lovely things about forgiveness and living in peace and having, the kind of life that you're supposed to have because you're a person of faith. But we have not one single class that addresses, well, how do you get to forgiveness? What has to happen inside of you? What process do you have to follow to get there? And the practice of of contemplative things can help you with that process of forgiveness, if you had any understanding of how it might even work, and how those two things might actually complement each other. But we don't have any of those conversations because we don't teach anything about that in seminary.
Hmm.
And then so you've got leaders that don't know anything about it, or maybe they find something about it, but then they don't think the congregation wants to hear it, so they don't talk about it very much. And so it's kind of sad to me. So when every time I preach, that's what I'm preaching about.
Mm.
I preach a lot, and I'm always preaching about finding a path and being on it and finding a practice that makes sense for you, and how you make it through the world, being the person God called you to be. That's what I talk about all the time. And people respond incredibly well to it.
Hmm.
And I think it's because it's, in some ways, it's a refreshing message.
Yeah, and there might even be something sort of intuitively true that they've been waiting for someone to tell them about it.
Mm-hmm.
That, like, the still small
Mm-hmm.
voice is within us all, and yet, like you said, we're actually not even taught to be comfortable with like not knowing an answer. We really do. Seminary is all about knowing the answers,
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
and I think the
Yeah.
contemplative journey is so much about release and surrender
Right.
that
That's
uh,
right.
it runs kind of counter to the knowingness of it all.
Mhm. And in the process of having to know all the answers, you can't ask any questions. And
Hmm.
so you keep on having to live in the illusion that you created for yourself, that you know the answers that you don't know, but you got
Right.
to act like you do. And so
Right.
then, I mean, no wonder our churches are in the mess they're in, because we spend more time pretending to be something that we're not, rather than being able to explore and interrogate and become whatever it is whoever it is we were put here to become. And you can't do that by pretending to be somebody else.
Mm.
So anyway, it's a long journey from where we are to where we need to go, I think. But I'm going to keep on trying to stay faithful to the process, and then stay courageous enough to talk about it.
Mm. And so, as I mentioned, to you in the beginning, this is really part of a series on Lent, which is 40
Mhm.
days of. I mean, I think that the 40 days is obviously not mapped onto Jesus's 40 days in the desert, but the 40 I think does come from there, and the idea of a real
Mhm.
contemplative journey into. I heard it once referred to as like Jesus going to find out what Jesus was supposed to be, like who am I supposed to
Yeah.
be? And so here, these people are listening to this on a Lenten journey. How do you how do you see the contemplative practice informing, this period of Lent where we're really trying to let go,
Mhm.
not necessarily of chocolate, but just like let go, right? Walk
Right.
into that path of trying to figure out what we're supposed to be if we're.
Yeah. I think that I would wish for people that we would get past worrying about chocolate at
Yeah.
Lent, and get way deep into the internal interrogation, and kind of looking at ourselves and saying, okay, where do I need to go? What is God asking of me? I think this era that we're in right now, this COVID era, is an era that's the whole era is like Lent, is asking us to let go and to relinquish a way of being and thinking, and to kind of reimagine who we are and why we're here and what life is about, because so many things have been uh, put on the table that we needed to refocus about. And so I think that again, it just comes back to what I've been saying the whole time, that whatever practices you have, and whatever contemplative practices you have, can help you keep yourself from flying off the deep end, and keep you able to stay steady enough to stay grounded. I mean, I think it's a very important to be grounded when you're letting go,
Mm.
because you're creating this kind of space where there's emptiness and you don't know what's going to come to be in it, and it can be very unnerving to be to not be where you were, and not to be where you're going, but you're somewhere, and you don't quite know where somewhere is. So how to stand still in that, and the contemplative practice can help with making it possible for you to have the courage to stand still and wait for the new revelation that's going to come out of what happens after you've gone through the emptying during Lent. So I think part of the reason why people don't do any of this stuff is because it's so unnerving,
Right.
because you're in this space where you don't have all the answers, you don't know what's going on, and you're not who you excuse me, you're not who you were, but you're on your way somewhere, and sometimes you don't quite know where that is, and yet you know that you're evolving. And I'm thinking that having some practices that bring you back to, like, at least you know how to sit and be quiet, or you know how to write in your journal, or you know how to do your prayers. So you keep doing the thing that you know to do, until some new revelation comes to you. So that's an important practice to have, I think.
Hmm. And so, one of the other sort of dimensions that I'm talking about during Lent this year is um, how it relates to our understanding of justice. And we've just
Mm,
been through this. We've been through this 4 years of Donald Trump and Black Lives Matter this last year, COVID, which has impacted lots of people, but some
mm,
places more acutely than others. The
mhm,
environment, like as we go through this Lenten journey, as we're being asked to, see what God is asking, who God is asking us to be.
mhm.
How do you sort of wed your contemplative journey with Lent and with justice, if if it is that explicit?
Well, I don't know that it is quite, I don't quite think about it that way.
Hmm.
But what I think about a lot is, again, what I was just kind of speaking about a minute ago, in terms of what is this opportunity that's being presented here in the midst of the chaos that we are embracing. We had some turbulent years. The country has been in in the situation that we find ourselves at this moment. We have been in this situation a long time. It's just been exacerbated here
Right.
in the last 4 years, and now with the election and the insurrection and all the stuff that's going on, and the mean spiritedness and all of the things that are happening have just been right underneath the surface for a very long time, and it just kind of come up to sit and look us in the face. So so in some ways, I just need to reiterate the sense of finding a place to be grounded and keep asking, being willing to be turned upside down, to be to reimagine things, and to stand up taller, and to be more courageous, and not to be worried about trying to get back to the status quo, which is what a lot of folks are kind of waiting. Can we just get back to normal? Well, we're not going to get back to anything, and there is no normal to get back to. We're going to have to go forward, because that's what you have to do. You either go forward, or you die, or you go forward. You don't get to go backwards and reclaim a space that you're in. Not really, if you want to keep on living. If you do that, then you die. And it's like Dr. King says, if you do that, if you hold on, if you refuse to pay attention and engage in the transformation process, that you might live to be 90 years old, but it's just a belated announcement of an earlier death. And I think that's so true. And I think a lot of folks are um, in that space where when they do die physically, it will be a belated announcement of an earlier death, because they chose to try to stand in a place that they've been asked to leave. And it seems like everything that's happening right now in the country is an invitation to us to pay attention, to wake up, to look at things differently. And we can either say yes to the invitation, or we can say no. And I think that contemplative practice helps you to have the courage to say yes, because you know that that external stuff doesn't define you anyway.
Mm.
And if you're defining yourself on the basis of the United States, of the empire, you're in big trouble anyhow, because that's also fluid and unstable and a whole bunch of things. And so
Right.
if your definition of yourself and your stability and your livelihood is tied up in that, then you are you're going to be a very sad person. So there's got to be some place somewhere. Howard Thurman talks about, it's the core of yourself, of getting clarity about your core. And that's part of what the contemplative practice helps you to do, to get a sense of your self separated from external things that are changing all the time, so that you know what you brought into the storm, and it's not going to be blown away by the storm. You can hold on to that. It's like you're sitting in the eye of a hurricane, and you can sit there because it's still. That's what the contemplative practice does. It wraps you in a still point that gives you the ability to sit still until the storm blows over and you can see what you need to do next. If you don't have that, then you just get blown with the storm. And that's Thurman talked about that if you don't find that place inside yourself, then you just get blown by every wind that comes by. And so that's how, I guess, that's my response to the justice piece, is that you have been, that I'm grounded in some understandings that don't get shattered because things are turned upside down. And it helps me to then try to reimagine and reconfigure and re-understand, or whatever I have to do, and to be willing to get even more clarity about what it is that I want to stand up for.
Mm.
So I don't know if that helps with your question about justice and Lent, but it's just kind of where I find myself.
No, I thought that was amazing. And I really want to thank you for coming on. I think this has been a fantastic conversation. So,
Well, I'm glad. Thank you for inviting me, and it's good to see you again.
totally.
And in about a year, check in with me again and see where I am, what life is about.
Yeah, totally. Now, let me just read this outro for folks. I hope that you found this conversation with Dr. Catherine Meeks encouraging and helpful for your journey. You can find out more about her work by visiting the website for the Absalom Jones Episcopal Center for Racial Healing at centerforracialhealing.org. Dr. Meeks also has her own podcast called A Brave Space with Dr. Meeks, and I'll put links to the website, the podcast, and a number of her books in the show notes. Thank you for joining us at the Seeker's Table. You can find all of our interviews on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts, as well as in the free spiritual resource library on the Seeker's Table website. I categorize all of the interviews there based on theme and keywords. So if you're looking for guidance in a particular area, you can find a resource that's related to others. My name is Ian White-Marr, and I hope you'll join me again next week.